Let's look at the program now typed in Java, where we make use of parallel arrays. In this program, we have two arrays. The one array is used to store the names of the students. So I've got 5 students. I'm storing the names of the students. And then the second array is used to store the marks for those 5 students. So this is the parallel array that we have created. Then we have a routine where we can input the marks for the students as well as their names. So we actually first input the names. This is the statement that allows us to request the user to enter the name. And then here we get the name from the keyboard. And because it's a string, I'm using kb.next. And I'm storing it in ARR names. Immediately thereafter, while I got the name, I then request the user to enter that student's mark. And using kb.nextInt, that mark is now entered into ARR marks. So the loop executes 5 times, and each time it inputs the person's name and it inputs the corresponding mark. So when I is 0, it gets the first name and stores it in cell 0, and then it gets the first mark and stores that in the other array, also at position 0. So that is the parallel effect that is created. Similarly, when I then becomes 1, then the second name is stored at position 1, and the second mark is stored at position 1 as well. And this executes 5 times, inputting the 5 names and the marks. Now let's look at the next routine, which is the output. So in the output, we now, that is our routine for our output. So these are just, this SOP is just simply leaving a blank line. And then here I just have a heading to tell me what the marks are. And then the for loop allows me to go to each cell in both the arrays. I've got one system out print line. And in the one system out print line, I print the name of the, I print the name of the student. I leave a tab space. That's going to leave a tab space. And then I print the corresponding mark for that particular student. So this is a simple segment that allows me to display the names and the marks, and they will be printed in tabular form. In other words, if I have name X, I'll have the mark for name X. If I've got another name Y, I'll have the mark for that, and then the next name and the mark. So it creates this tabular form when we are going to output. Thereafter, we're finding the name of the student with the highest mark. So this is the routine that allows me to find the name of the student with the highest mark. Again, we start off with just headings. So these are just headings where it leaves a blank line and then it prints the heading, the highest mark. Now, to find the highest mark, as I explained in the previous video on arrays, you need to create a variable called high. You need a variable high to store the highest mark. But now we are working with names and marks. So we need 2 high variables. The first high variable will store the mark, but when I get the highest mark at that given point in time, I also store the name of the student who had that highest mark. So I start off with cell 0, and I store the mark in a variable called high mark. Now the corresponding name for that mark is also in cell 0, so I take that name and I store it in high name. So at that point in time, I got the first mark and the first name stored in high name and high mark. Thereafter, we start the loop. And notice that although I started the loop at 0, I should actually start the loop at 1 because I've already got cell 0 stored, the high name and the mark. So when I start searching, I want to start from cell 1. And I make a check. I check if that particular mark, if that mark in the array is greater than high mark, which was the original one that I've got stored, which is in position 0. Now, if that mark is higher than the mark that I have currently, then I take that mark and I replace high mark with this new high mark. And then I store the corresponding name for that particular student. Notice we are using position I. In both instances, I use position I, and that's because of the parallel effect. So the loop executes until it finishes. Each time it's checking to see if the mark is greater than high. If the mark is not greater than high, it just goes back up and the loop increments to the next value, and it then checks the next cell. And each time it finds a mark greater than the current high mark that we have. As long as it finds a mark greater, it then goes and it replaces that high mark and the corresponding name for that mark. So once this loop finishes, high mark will have the highest mark and it will have the corresponding name. So all I need to do is display the highest. Well, in this case, I'm saying the name of the student with the highest mark. I display name, and I've got another message to display the corresponding mark. So I'm searching through the marks, but whilst I'm searching through the mark array, when I find a high mark, I keep track of the name array as well. That's the technique that is used in finding the student with the highest mark. Then the next routine we are looking at is where we are performing a search. So this routine is performing a search. Again, I'm starting off with some headings. So these are all of my headings. A blank line, I've got a heading that says search. Now, if you are searching for something, you have to request the user to enter the value that they are searching for. So that's what I start off with. I request, I'm searching for a name, right? So ask the user to enter a name, and then here it is, I've got my, because it's a string, kb.next. So I get the name that the user wants to search for. Now I start the actual search. So in the previous video, I explained exactly how the search routine works. If you've missed that, please refer to that video where we make use of this Boolean variable that's set to false. And then when I find what I'm looking for, I then change it to true. So this is the routine. And then here is my for loop that allows me to start the search from position 0 till the end. We start the search and I'm looking for a match. So this is looking for the match. It's checking the value in the array. So this is the value in the array, and it's checking that against the value that I have input. So that's the value I input and I'm looking for, and that's the value it's checking. And when we are comparing two strings, we cannot use the equal to check two strings because then it's checking addresses and it's not checking values. So we use the predefined function called equals ignore case. And it effectively, it's checking the value n and it's checking it with the value in the array at position r. And if it's equal, ignores case, it doesn't matter whether it's uppercase, lowercase. It just wants to find a match. If it finds a match, I change my flag that was false, I change it to true, and I output the student's corresponding mark, because that's what the question wants. I search for a name. When I find the name, I output the corresponding mark. And if the name, if we're searching a particular cell and the name is not found, the loop, it just simply goes back up the loop. And in going up the loop, it is changing to a new position, and you're checking a new value in the array. Now, if you reach the end of the loop and it did not find a match, if you went to the end and there was no match, if there was no match, that means flag would not have changed to true. It would have remained false. So after the loop completes, when it finishes, I simply check the value of flag. I check the value of flag, and if flag still remains true, if flag remains false, it did not change to true, flag remained false, then it can only mean one thing, and that means that it was not found. So this is the technique if you're going to use when you are searching for a particular name in an array. And notice that the Boolean variable aspect of the technique doesn't change whether you're working with parallel arrays or if you're working with a single array. The final routine that we're going to look at is a sort. So again, if you've not watched the previous video on the sort, this is a typical selection sort. The manner in which the sort technique works was explained in the previous video. It checks cells. What you need to know is that this loop is starting at 0. It's starting at I starts at 0, and then J starts at one position more than I. And what you are doing is you are checking if the array I is greater than array J, if you want it in ascending order. So I check if the value at position I is greater than the value at position J. And if it is, then the swap is conducted. So these three statements are swapping the two marks at position I and J. And because it's a parallel array, you have to swap the corresponding names in the other array to maintain that parallel effect. So a double swap is taking place. If you only swap the marks and you don't swap the names, then you're losing the parallel effect in the two arrays. So this essentially is going to perform a sort. And then finally, I have another output, which is exactly as was the case previously, but after it performs the sort, I'm doing an output so you can see whether the values are actually sorted. I think it's time to give this program a run and to see what the output is so that we can understand whether it works or not. So enter a name. So let's enter name X and enter the mark for X. So I'm just going to enter 40, enter another name. I'm going to enter Y, and this mark is 70. Enter a name. I'm going to go Z, and this mark is 20 maybe. And I'm then going to go A, that's the name. The mark is 90. And the final one is, I'm going to enter the name B, and the mark is 60. So I've got 5 names and 5 marks. And this is where it is now printing. This is the output. It's displaying the marks. There's the names, and there's the corresponding marks. And that's the tabular form that it is displaying it in. And then it says the highest mark. Remember, it's finding the highest mark. So at this stage, it is finding, that's the name, it says highest mark, it says the name of the student with the highest mark is A, and the mark is 90. Let's just go back and check. And if you had to check this, you will see that there it is, the mark. The student A has the mark 90. Then we had a search. So now it's asking me for the name to search for. So if I had to type Y, it should give me 70. If I had to type B, it should give me 60. And if I had to type C as a name, it should tell me the name is not found. So what should I do here? Let's go and print Z. So enter the name. So it should tell me that the student's mark is 20. So there it is here. Right? I searched for Z and the mark was 20. And then after the search, we have the sorted list. We've got the sorted list. And if you look at it very carefully, you'll see that 20, 40, 60, 70, 90. And you'll also see that the order has changed. It's no longer X, Y, Z, A, B. That's how I entered it. It still maintained the parallel effect. And this was maintained because we swapped the mark and we also swapped the corresponding name. So this is a typical routine that makes use of parallel arrays. I hope that this helps you in understanding better how these parallel arrays work. Thank you and goodbye.